Hi everyone, I'm Evan. Today I'm presenting my project on replacing sugar with stevia in cookies to create a low-calorie alternative. For my introduction, I chose cookies as my food and sugar as my main ingredient to replace. I chose cookies because they're universally loved and sugar plays a critical role in their success. I chose to replace sugar specifically because it's the most multifunctional ingredient. Sugar contributes to browning, structure, moisture retention, and texture, not just sweetness. Replacing it tests whether we can maintain quality without it, which matters because 11% of Canadians have diabetes and need sugar-free options. My replacement ingredient is stevia, a natural sweetener from the stevia plant. It's 200 to 300 times sweeter than sugar, has 0 calories because it's not metabolized by the body, it's heat stable so it survives baking, and causes no blood glucose increase, making it safe for diabetics. I chose stevia because it addresses diabetic needs with no blood sugar spike, eliminates about 60 calories per cookie from sugar, has natural origin for clean label appeal, and is heat stable unlike aspartame, which degrades during baking. My research problem asks, can stevia successfully replace sugar in cookies while maintaining acceptable taste and texture? Based on food science principles, I predicted both positive and negative outcomes. On the positive side, stevia should provide adequate sweetness and be safe for diabetics. On the negative side, I expect the cookies would be very pale because stevia isn't a reducing sugar, so it can't do Maillard browning and it doesn't caramelize. I also predicted that they may have dense texture because stevia can't cream with butter like sugar crystals do, may have a bitter aftertaste, which is a known issue with steviol glycosides, and may dry out fast because stevia lacks hygroscopic properties. For my methodology, I followed 7 steps. First, I preheated the oven to 375 degrees Fahrenheit. Second, I mixed 1 cup of softened butter with 1 cup of Splenda stevia using a mixer on medium for 3 minutes. Third, I added 1 egg and mixed until combined. Fourth, in a separate bowl, I whisked together 1 and 3/4 cups flour, half a teaspoon baking powder, and a quarter teaspoon salt. Fifth, I added the dry ingredients to the wet mixture and mixed until combined. Sixth, I scooped the dough into baking sheets, flattened them slightly, and baked for 8 to 10 minutes. Seventh, I cooled them on a rack, then photographed and measured them. For results, here's how the cookies turned out. The food appearance was dramatically different. Uh, The color was extremely pale or white, like shortbread or even a raw dough. They were only brown on the bottom where the pan had touched, and the shape was domed and thicker, with less spread than normal cookies. The surface was smooth, minimal cracking, and definitely the pale appearance was the most striking difference. The texture was also very different. The cookies were firm yet moist at first, dense throughout rather than layered like regular cookies, and became very hard after 24 hours. This density and rapid hardening indicated problems with the stevia substitution. Comparing my stevia cookies to the original with granulated sugar, the differences were significant. My stevia cookies were pale and white versus golden brown for the regular cookies. They were domed versus flat for the regular cookies. The texture was bread-like versus tender and layered texture with the regular cookies. And they got very hard in 24 hours versus regular cookies staying relatively soft. They had a bitter aftertaste versus the sweet aftertaste of the regular cookies. However, my cookies only had about 80 calories per cookie versus 140 calories for the regular cookies. And most importantly, they were sugar-free and therefore safe for diabetics. Comparing to comparing to commercial sugar-free cookies, they use different strategies than I did. Commercial products are light tan in color because they add cocoa powder or molasses for the color component, and they use sugar alcohol blends like erythritol and stevia for better texture. My cookies were pure white because I didn't add any color additives, and I used only the stevia blend without optimization. This shows why commercial products invest in complex reformulations, and simple substitution like mine doesn't produce the results you're looking for. So the science explains why my cookies were so pale. The Maillard browning needs reducing sugars like glucose and fructose to react with proteins. Stevia is not a reducing sugar, so we have no Maillard reaction, resulting in no brown color. Similarly, caramelization needs sugars heated above 160 degrees Celsius. Stevia doesn't caramelize, so there's no caramel color. The dense texture also has a scientific explanation. Sugar crystals cut into butter during creaming, creating thousands of tiny air pockets that make cookies light in texture. Stevia is a different crystal structure, so it creates less air during creaming, resulting in a dense result with few air pockets. This explains why cookies had that bread-like texture instead of the layered, tender texture of normal cookies. Um, the rapid drying also has a scientific explanation. Sugar is hygroscopic, meaning it binds water through hydrogen bonding. Stevia lacks this hygroscopic property, so water quickly evaporated from my cookies, making them very hard within 24 hours. This is why the granulated sugar-based cookies stay soft longer. The sugar actively holds onto moisture, but stevia cannot do this. For the blind taste test, I had my mother as my independent evaluator. She's a regular cookie consumer with no food allergies. I set up six samples, three of my stevia cookies and three store-bought regular cookies, and labeled them A through F randomly so she didn't know which one was which. She tasted each one with water and crackers between samples for palate cleansing, and her feedback was clear. For my stevia cookies, she said they tasted like some sort of bread. They were sweet, but the aftertaste ruined it, and she gave them an overall rating of 2 out of 5. For the regular sugar cookies, she simply said they tasted like cookies and rated them a 4 out of 5. She correctly identified all my stevia-based cookies on their pale color, dense texture, and bitter aftertaste. This bitter aftertaste comes from the stevia glycosides activating bitter taste receptors, which is a known limitation of non-caloric sweeteners. In summary, there are both successes and failures. On the success side, stevia provided adequate sweetness. I achieved low calories with about 60 calories per cookie, and the cookies were safe for diabetics with no glucose impact. On the failure side, the cookies were extremely pale due to no browning reactions. They had a dense bread-like texture and a bitter aftertaste that was detected by my taster and dried out, becoming very hard in 24 hours, and were additionally only rated 2 out of 5 compared to a 4 out of 5 for the regular cookies. The bottom line is that stevia successfully replaced sugar for sweetness and calories, but could not replace sugar's other functions like browning structure and moisture retention, resulting in major quality compromises. The significance of this project is threefold. For food science, it proved that ingredients are multifunctional. You can't just swap them out. The concepts about Maillard browning, caramelization, and hygroscopic properties accurately predicted my results, and non-caloric sweetener principles were confirmed. For consumers, this shows why sugar-free products often disappoint and sets realistic expectations for diabetic-friendly foods. So my experiment had several important limitations. First, I only had a single taste tester, which is not statistically significant. Proper consuming testing needs 50 to 100 people, and I can't generalize preference from just one person, especially with something like stevia. Additionally, stevia sensitivity varies, with some people tasting bitterness more than others. Secondly, I didn't optimize the recipe for stevia. I use the same temperatures of 375 degrees and the same time of 8 to 10 minutes as a regular sugar recipe or sugar-based cookie recipe. I should have tested lower temperatures like 350 plus a longer time to maximize browning. And I also didn't adjust for flour or fat amounts specifically for stevia. This was essentially a worst case scenario of a direct swap with no adjustments. For future directions, I have both immediate improvements and longer term research ideas. For immediate improvements, I would add 2 to 3 tablespoons of cocoa powder to mask the pale color. I would try a different version of stevia, which has less bitterness in the current blend. Lower the oven temperature to 350 degrees instead of 375 degrees for longer baking to try to maximize browning. For longer term research, I would test with 50 or more people instead of just one statistical instead of just one for more statistical validity, and add texture modifiers like insulin fiber or extra fat to improve mouthfeel and optimize the recipe from scratch, specifically for stevia, rather than adapting it from a sugar recipe. I would also like to try stevia in brownies where the dark pale color is already expected and it would mask the pale color issue. Thank you for listening to my presentation. The main takeaway is that you can't just swap sugar for stevia and expect the same cookie. Thank you.